Why don't we get started here? Uh, Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on decarbonizing Scope 3 emissions through joint action. My name's Marty Spitzer, and I'm the Senior Director for Climate and Energy at World Wildlife Fund. I lead the team here that works with WWF's corporate partners to help set and accelerate implementation of their climate targets. We work one-on-one with companies in our climate business network and have established and managed various buyers coalitions to help drive progress, such as the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, the Renewable Thermal Collaborative. Our work and this session today are about invention of collaborative efforts to make progress, putting first-of-a-kind approaches in the field and then scaling them. Over the last 10 years, our work around the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, which is now its own freestanding organization, has led to about 100 gigawatts of corporate renewable electricity purchases since 2015. The Science Based Targets Initiative, another initiative WWF helped start, has reached over 9,000 companies globally that have set targets. This is the scale and more that we need. And today, we have some excellent speakers, some of whom are going to share how their initiatives, buyer coalition initiatives, are tackling the challenge of hard-to-abate sectors and emissions, and companies who are engaging with those initiatives. Today's webinar is going to be recorded. We'll share a link around afterwards with a follow-up note with some resources for everyone from the organizations who are on the panel. And then after the discussion that we'll have as the panel, we're going to take some questions from you. So please submit those questions in the Zoom Q&A. Use the Q&A function as we go along, and we will get to as many of them as we can. Before we get started on the panel, let me just say a word about America is All In, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. America is All In is the largest coalition of U.S. institutions ever assembled to take on the climate challenge. It's composed of state and local governments, tribal nations, businesses, investors, educational, cultural, and healthcare institutions. And in total, they represent 2/3 of the U.S. population and almost 3/4 of GDP. So big coalition. WWF has served as the secretariat for the initiative since it was established in 2017, when President Trump took us out of the Paris Agreement the first time. Since that time, it's worked to advance climate action at the subnational level, advocate for ambitious policy, show up at international events like the international climate meetings, to show proven U.S. climate leadership. And we see climate progress as requiring an all-of-society approach to secure a healthy, prosperous, and equitable, sustainable future for everyone. You're going to hear us come back to this principle about collaboration during today's webinar, as it's essential to the work of all the organizations here and what we do and how we do it. With that, let me welcome our speakers today. We have Kim Carnahan, who's the founder and CEO of the Center for Green Market Activation, sometimes referred to as GMA. We have Ingrid Irigoyen, who's the CEO of the Zero Emissions Maritime Buyers Alliance, affectionately called ZEMBA. We have Daniel Riley, who's the Director of Corporate Climate and Energy, who manages WWF's role in the Renewable Thermal Collaborative. We have Elizabeth Moon, who's the Global Sustainability Manager for Supply Chain Operations at IKEA. And finally, we have Eleanor Bastian, who's the Principal Program Manager for Global Sustainability Operations at Amazon. So welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. And let's get this conversation started with a sort of an opening question for everyone. For those of you who manage the initiative, ZEMBA, GMA's work, and RTC, could you just introduce yourself and briefly share a bit about how your organization works with companies to decarbonize their operations and value chains? And sort of what problems are you set up to try to address? Let's start with, who wants to go first? Kim, you're at the top of my screen.
All right. Thank you so much, Marty, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak today. GMA, as we usually call ourselves, our work can be split into two buckets now. The first, and the reason we were initially launched, was to help companies find and scale critical climate technologies in heavy industry and transport through the use of book and claim systems and demand aggregating buyers alliances. What we found through this work was that there was also a significant gap in the existing rule landscape for GHG accounting and reporting when it comes to value chain interventions. So together with our partners at the Gold Standard and C2ES, we founded the AIM platform, the Advanced and Indirect Mitigation platform, which is now nearly completed, a full standard and guidance covering everything you need to know about accounting and reporting for value chain interventions. Our goal at the AIM platform is to provide input into the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the Science Based Targets Initiative as they are considering how they allow the use of indirect mitigation approaches like those that we help support through book and claim systems. And we are right now really actively working both in this accounting space as well as in our space to run, develop book and claim systems and to run buyers alliances. We originally were the secretariat for the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, or SABA. We then had the great fortune to work with Ingrid and team at Zemba, which I know she'll talk about in a minute. We are now also running a trucking alliance for net zero trucking. And we have new programs in chemicals covering both fertilizer and plastics or ethylene decarbonization, as well as concrete. So we're working across a number of different sectors and working to help companies find ways to decarbonize their value chain in those sectors. I'll stop it there.
Thank you, Kim. Ingrid, over to you.
Great, thank you. So I run the Zero Emission Maritime Buyers Alliance. We work with customers of the ocean shipping industry, or also known as freight buyers, to create new markets for decarbonization solutions that are not currently readily available. Why? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? In the ocean transport sector, we urgently need vastly scalable, very low carbon alternatives for ship propulsion that can come down in cost significantly with scale. And we need to do so quickly so that our member companies can confidently achieve their Scope 3 commitments without breaking the bank. We do this by aggregating demand across several dozen freight buyer companies. We currently have almost 50 members from all over the world, and we run procurements on their behalf. So we set the technical specifications for what kind of fuel or technology we want to see deployed. We're clear on when we want to see deployment and over the course of how many years. And then once we launch that procurement, ocean carriers submit bids to our Zemba bid review team, which is composed of a number of neutral technical experts, including representatives from GMA as well. So nice collaboration at multiple levels here on the panel. And at the end of a very thorough validation process, we recommend a winning bid or bids to our freight buyer members. We provide a lot of hands-on support to our members at no cost. We're basically like a surge team for your sustainability and freight procurement operation in-house. And at the end of our process, we give you the option as a member to contract with the winning carriers for specific volumes of emissions reduction using specific fuels on specific ships that carriers then commit to deploy with those contracts in hand. Because we focus on long-term solutions that are not yet readily available to freight buyers, we structure these as forward procurements, meaning that there is some lead time between when our members contract with a winning carrier and when we require the deployment of the new fuel or technology. Because we also offer longer term commitments, it gives certainly longer term than carriers are normally accustomed to. That gives confidence not only to those carriers who are really the service provider, but also to fuel producers, investors, ports, and many others across what is actually a very complex maritime supply chain. This longer term demand we think is really important and is a feature of many buyers alliances because it allows us to anchor the business case for the sector's energy transition. Another key aspect of our theory of change is that we can gain economies of scale right out of the gate when we buy these innovative new products or services in bulk. And that obviously is really important, particularly for first of its kind projects. We ensure that the freight buyer demand is channeled not just to a great deal from a commercial point of view, but also to very high integrity in-sector emissions reductions that come from deployment of the right long-term solutions. So it's about building that critical market confidence that we need to drive more and more scale and more economic viability over time. We also find that it's helpful to share our go-to-market experience and our work with the private sector with policymakers in a variety of different venues. We do that as to meet the need for them to see that this is the future, right? The most future-oriented, some of the most important companies in the world view this decarbonization pathway or these pathways as the future. And so therefore those pathways are worthy of supporting as a sustainable economic growth opportunity for countries around the world. So in short, it's all about creating new competitive markets for scalable low carbon solutions. We want to help companies get maritime emissions out of their supply chains in a way that they can feel confident will be affordable in the long run and actually achieve their goals. And we really offer, I think, a real measurable impact, as well as the possibility of cost and risk sharing with other companies who are facing the same challenges. And so Maritime is just one example of how that kind of collaboration unfolds. And we cannot do it alone. We work with a lot of great partners. I've already mentioned GMA, who we rely on for a lot of technical help. And of course, freight buyers like Amazon and IKEA, whose leadership is absolutely essential. And I'll wrap by saying along with Amazon and with a lot of great input from IKEA, we launched this project in 2023, and we're just now wrapping up our second procurement already. So we move fast, we drive impact, and we do it in a way that is really collaborative, even though we have speed. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share, and back to you, Marty.
All right, thanks, Ingrid. Dan, over to you on RTC, the Renewable Thermal Collaborative.
Great, thanks, Marty. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Riley. I'm a director on the climate business team at WWF, but I'm also part of the staff of the Renewable Thermal Collaborative, or the RTC. The RTC is a growing global coalition that's expanded from about 15 companies working together in 2021 to over 120 companies, institutions, and governments today. And it's working to decarbonize thermal energy, and that's by scaling renewable heating and cooling solutions. Our members span industries from food and beverage to chemicals to manufacturing, and it represents about close to $6.5 trillion in market capitalization. So it's a big group of large energy users. The RTC is comprised of buyers and solution providers, and that's really the secret sauce of the RTC. The buyers, or members as we call them, are the companies with the thermal loads and the decarbonization targets. Those are the energy users. And the RTC connects them directly with solution providers. So these are the technology innovators, the experts, the engineering firms, the certificate tracking systems, environmental service companies, other coalitions, you name it. They come together within the RTC, and it's that collaboration that's intended to overcome technical, policy, and market barriers. So you can see sort of relative to GMA and Zemba, it's a much broader approach to the challenge and a bit of a bigger tent. By working together, both peer-to-peer with members and solution providers, we generate knowledge, experience, and track records of success to then create the practical pathways to scale renewable thermal. The RTC was created by WWF, as Marty mentioned, along with C2ES, the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, and David Gardner and Associates, DGA, who's a DC-based private sector consulting firm, and they really serve as the secretariat for the RTC. Marty also mentioned the RTC is modeled off of previous successful corporate collaborations that WWF has been a part of, most similarly probably the Clean Energy Buyers Alliance, if you're familiar with it. But here again, the focus is on thermal energy, and that's really the scope one facility emissions that are such a critical part of industrial decarbonization, and that really until recently were part of the neglected wedge of the climate pie. RTC, however, if you think about it, really works across scopes. So it's helping companies decarbonize thermal energy in their supply chain, so immediately touches on scope 3, and it really supports electrification as an effective solution for many thermal processes, so immediately coming into scope 2 for companies in their own operations as well as their supply chain, so the scope 2 of scope 3. Today, we work primarily in the US, but we've done work in Europe already, and we've just recently hired our first director of Europe. And we're working with members to develop a supplier training program in Asia that we hope to launch very soon. I will say that overall, we're kind of think about really 4 buckets or 4 objectives for the RTC. One is to just create a larger, more active community that's working on thermal decarbonization. So how do we bring more companies to the table, more solution providers to the table? How do we raise that awareness and that knowledge base of actors, both and including policymakers and other stakeholders? How do we create a clearer consensus or better understanding or just more knowledge of which technologies to prioritize, where and when? And then how do we increase the adoption? So this is where the rubber meets the road. How do we get those deals done that both Kim and Ingrid spoke about? How do we get those money flowing and those investment decisions and final investment decisions done within companies, both in the US and in the supply chains internationally? And then finally, how do we set up for success? How do we get the federal and state policies as well as the market conditions that are going to allow for the longer term scale up? And so we really think about that in the RTC in 2 ways. One, how do we help the leaders that are actively engaged to make the investments that they need now to reduce their emissions? While at the same time, how do we shape the market and policy conditions that are needed for the longer term transition? And so that's kind of always on our mind at the RTC, the now and then the future. So thanks, Marty.
All right, Dan, thank you. Now, Elizabeth and then Eleanor, give us a perspective for you, how you work with your suppliers, kind of to decarbonize on the value chain. And then what challenges have you faced in tackling these hard-to-abate sectors that we were just talking about, whether it's, transport, maritime, or others? Elizabeth, why don't we start with you?
Okay, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here in this panel. Well, first of all, I come from IKEA supply chain operations. So we are then responsible for the global transportation and warehousing of IKEA home furnishing goods. And we do about 1.7 million shipments a year over the oceans and on land. We don't have any own trucks, no vessels, no railroad or anything. Also, all transport emissions are in our scope 3. So the journey that we are on is towards a 0 emission goods flow using 100% renewable energy across our supply chain. And we have a very important milestone now in 2030, which is, first of all, to halve the emissions, the absolute emissions, 50%, but then also to reduce the average emissions from every transport we do by minus 70% compared to 2017. That is when we set the targets. And the last figures I have is that we are now down by 42%. So we are working very focused in our business on these targets in every part of our business. And 2030, it's definitely no longer a distant future. And the coming 5 years now is a sprint to hit the target. And what we do today is really determine if we are to reach the target in 2030. So we are working with very concrete, sharp, detailed actions so to ensure that we can reach this. And for us, it's all about collaboration in the supply chain. It is about working very closely in our business with our service providers, but also beyond, and to really understand what.
Elizabeth, you just muted yourself somehow, or somehow you got muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. So it's really about capturing the opportunities and potentials in an end-to-end process, end-to-end flows. And also here, when we come to hard-to-abate sectors, we cannot do it alone. Even if we are a big company doing all of these shipments, we cannot do it alone. We need to work together with others. So this collaborative approach is really, really important for us.
Great. Eleanor?
Thank you.
You're up.
Thank you. It's great to be here with this excellent panel, and thanks to America is All In for hosting this. So I'm Eleanor Bastian. I am with Amazon. My scope of my role is actually really similar to Elizabeth. So global operations of Amazon. So everything from the finished good leaving a factory to the customer's doorstep and all of our geographies where we have markets. And to add to that, Amazon does own trucks and containers and planes even now. So we perform some of those transportation and logistic functions, but we also use a vast number of suppliers to do that. So our way of engaging with our suppliers is a 3-step process that happens bilaterally between Amazon and our suppliers to start. One is that we ask our suppliers to set goals and targets related to greenhouse gases. Then we also ask them to start sharing data with us and figure out how to report on the emissions from the work they do for us. And third, we encourage them to report progress, and including reporting that publicly. And so with that, trying to make progress is where I think these joint action mechanisms really come in, because after that bilateral engagement between Amazon and its suppliers, lots of times they said, well, you have these electric trucks in this geography. Maybe we can work together to move some goods, and we can use our electric truck that we purchase, use the same charging infrastructure. That sometimes can work, but actually we need more parties involved, a larger ecosystem, usually, to make those projects cost competitive and efficient use of resources. So, once we have these commitments with our suppliers to take action, we really point them towards buyers alliances and other engagement mechanisms, because we can't do it alone. As Ingrid said, we need to identify these specific technical pathways that are going to get us to near or zero emissions. And by working all together, we can sort of galvanize markets, see final investment decisions faster, and everyone can sort of take action together and see costs come down.
Yeah, great. That's a great segue, actually. We're going to just pause here for a second. I'll turn to Kim to start us off on, there's unique issues around these hard-to-abate sectors and decarbonizing. They were the last ones we're trying to actually decarbonize systematically. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what is it about these sectors that makes them sort of so difficult, and how they should be shaping company strategy.
Yeah, it's so many things, really. I mean, you heard Eleanor talk about their supplier engagement strategy, and most companies that we work with at GMA do have pretty elaborate supplier engagement strategies in place, but it's still barely, it's like the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, in terms of their overall Scope 3 emissions inventory. And one of the biggest problems that we see, though certainly not the only one, is that the actual operational control of most of the emissions within a company's Scope 3 emissions inventory does not lie with their Tier 1 suppliers in many, many cases. And so they're needing to hop over, actually, their Tier 1 supplier to Tier 2 to their Tier 3 to find out where is the accumulation of emissions along this value chain? Where can we have the most impact with, frankly, the least amount of activity? Because you have companies, most of the companies that we work with, that have 10,000 Tier 1 suppliers. Think about how many Tier 2, Tier 3 suppliers those companies have. We need to find a way to enable them to, surgically almost get at the emissions that are deep down in the value chain that so desperately need to be addressed. So that kind of supplier visibility or connection is often a huge problem, though not always. Another huge problem within the heavy industry and transport sector is just technology cost. And similarly availability. So you may have a technology available in one part of the world, but that's not where you need it right now because it is, cutting edge in many cases. You also may have technology costs that is much, much higher in one place than in another place. And it makes more sense economically from an efficiency standpoint to address those emissions wherever they can be addressed the quickest and the most versus necessarily having a direct geographical connection. So those are kind of two main situations. And then to be honest, we also find a big problem with the dynamism in supply chains. Companies know that they know who they're buying from next year. And Ingrid was talking about the lead time that it takes to get a lot of these projects off the ground. They may know who they're going to work with next year, but they don't know who they're going to work with in 10 years. And they maybe can't direct that right now either. So they need a way to be able to invest in a meaningful project in a meaningful offtake agreement that may not even take effect for 3, 5, 10 years, know that they can take credit for it towards their climate target. Otherwise, what's the point? And they may not be able to do that if they're not sure they're still going to be, contracting with whoever their specific supplier is today. So there's a lot of problems that we're solving for in the GMA space and the space that all of the speakers are talking about today. What we are working to do is set up frameworks that enable companies to act credibly, but act now and really to act as fast as possible. So that's kind of what we focus on. And I have to applaud Ingrid. Her description of what Zemba did was perfect. And I would just like to say what she said, but for the sectors that we also run, it's basically a very similar approach that we take for aviation, for trucking, for cement and concrete, and for fertilizer and ethylene/plastics right now.
So just to put a fine point on something you said, the solutions that we're talking about here are not widely available. They tend to be costly. And if they are available somewhere, they're not available everywhere. So we need to have ways of investing in those things. These are still nascent industries. And I think it's an important thing to keep in mind that they need more flexibility in how we invest, which is why these things are so attractive.
May I also just say each of the sectors is different too. Obviously, we take a lot of lessons that we learned from aviation and apply it to other transport sectors or even apply it to concrete. But the second you move into another sector, you're like, oh, the exact problems we're facing here are different. So to a point that Daniel was making, it's important to get a group of people together who can share in both the kind of their efforts to move towards a bigger solution. And by all this learning that we're doing across sectors, what we're able to do that, we're also able to bring in companies that are experiencing slightly different situations, or in some cases, slightly more success, and to share that success with other companies that are facing the same problem. So the Buyers Alliance model really solves for a number of different problems at the same time.
So I know I was going to say we have others could speak here, but I think there's a good pivot to Ingrid, back to you in terms of, so these are some of the challenges. You talked a little bit about some of the solutions, but could you dig a little deeper into the procurement approach that you're taking, and how have you prioritized creating competitive markets for next generations, these scalable solutions, and sort of what's the business case for the companies to be planning ahead as you think about it?
Yeah, those are really important questions, I think, because we really are sort of running out of time here, and we need to move quickly, and we need to be laser focused. And I like, Kim used the word sort of a surgical approach, and a lot of the work that we do and that Kim and her operation do, and Daniel, you're probably doing too, is about really helping to bring together technical experts that don't have a commercial interest in finding what are the right solutions for the long term, and doing really rigorous and thoughtful analysis that takes into account the economic situation, because we can't just say, well, just do it no matter what it costs. We know that that's unrealistic, right? And so we need to find what are going to be those economically viable solutions in the long run that can gain those economies of scale, bring that cost curve down, and hopefully only need to do this once in the next few decades, and not have to constantly be jumping from one bridge solution to another. And not to say that we don't need bridges, we certainly do. And sometimes those bridges can be more affordable in the beginning, but that's why you have to bring people together. It's almost like we're passing the hat and going, hey, we all know that in shipping, and to answer your question, we are focusing our second procurement on e-fuels, so green hydrogen derived fuels. that use only sustainable feedstocks that we think can actually decarbonize this entire gigantic hard-to-abate sector. And create those viable pathways to actually get to zero in a way that we can afford. And so that really is the business case, but it's being able to channel those resources to say, hey, Amazon, could you throw a little in the hat? Elizabeth, can you throw a little bit on the hat? Because we got a great deal. And none of your companies or the 40 something others could do that by yourselves. You can't do that with all the other sectors you have to decarbonize and spend all of your resources just on the one sector. But if we come together and we all pitch in, we can actually start to move the needle. And I think that fundamentally is that business case. And it is why we are focused, right, for those sectors where you can find the long-term solutions. In some sectors, we're still working on technology innovation, right? We still need more R&D. We need more venture support, all of that. But for a number of these sectors, we kind of know now, right? We know what the solutions are. We've done the modeling. They're basically ready to go. Now we just have to go. And what does go mean? It means corporate customers buying. And we need to create those enabling conditions for them to make those purchases, drive that measurable impact, drive scale, and do it in a way that isn't going to drive them crazy or make them go broke. And I think that, is sort of the mission that we all share. And I think is why all of this work has been so effective and why we're so pleased to be able to, share some of those results and some of those benefits with a broader audience today. Because it really is trying to be practical. It's trying to keep in mind the many, many tensions that businesses face. And keep in mind how hard it is to do long-term planning when our societies are really mostly organized around short-term thinking, election cycles and, sort of your next earnings report. Well, how do we then break out of that short-term cycle, plan for the long term, and make a business case for doing so? If you invest today, you'll save money in the long run. And if you're a business who plans to be in business in the next 10 years, you need to be doing that because you don't want to get caught flat-footed a decade from now. You didn't meet your climate commitments, and the only things available to you in your supply chain are things that aren't going to solve the problem or you can't afford. So coming together, thinking collaboratively, being strategic, that's what it's all about.
And actually, I want to turn to Dan for a minute because I think you started to talk about the broader set of things that companies are going to need in order to be successful. And see, I'm sitting here too long and my lights just went off. Dan, you've with the RTC, which we talked about is made up of energy buyers and solution providers. With the energy buyers trying to decarbonize their own operations and their supply chains, from an RTC perspective, what do the energy buyers need to be successful when they're thinking about this?
Yeah, thanks, Marty. I think when we think about the slightly broader lens of the RTC, that we're finding that there is no single pathway for decarbonizing thermal energy, and that for a lot of the companies, it may take a variety of technologies to be their solution stack, and so that for a lot of the members, finding the right way to engage and be part of the solution is part of being success. And so one of the things that we've done is try to provide a number of different ways for them to plug in. And so obviously on the technology side, one of the things that we've built is partnership workshops. These are kind of structured matchmaking where they can get together with a variety of different solution providers to talk about what they need and what the solution provider can do. So whether it's thermal storage, solar thermal, geothermal, RNG, even hydrogen, different electrification technologies, to come together and explore what those would be, or even within one of those, which might be the right fit for them within, even look at the heat pump market now is, there's a variety of different sub-technologies, which is going to be the right fit for you. We do know within our membership, electrification is a strong focus. And so we're starting to develop a variety of different ways for buyers to engage in electrification, particularly around heat pumps. So we have heat pump decision support tools where they can plug in data from their factories, and it can take them all the way through to understanding whether it might be a good choice depending on where their facility is located. Then there's boot camps where they can do an all-day industrial heat pump boot camp. There's also buyer seller connects, which are literally the same as the partnership workshops, but just with heat pump suppliers. within their area of operations. So we're also beginning to look at the utility landscape is one place where they can engage. We have the electrification playbook. We have targeted workshops, both one-on-one engagement with utilities, which will be very important, as well as sessions with commissioners like we did recently at NARUC. We had one today, which was to prepare buyers for how to engage with their utilities, just focused in California. So it's that type of specialized, but there's just a diversity of different engagements, but they have to be sort of specialized. So you're raising the capacity of companies to start to engage in this kind of very technical, broad engagements. I think that the last one I want to just touch on is we're also helping companies to navigate and also shape the policy landscape. We're working both on to educate policymakers, also do policy advocacy, for more effective policies, but also how to understand the policy. So we have a policy finder that looks at different states, what are the policies, but also how to access funding at the federal level. We had success. 9 RTC companies were selected for industrial demonstrations projects. They were slated to receive $1 billion of the $6 billion rewarded. Fortunately, that was largely cut. But building on that experience and that collaborative approach to helping make them successful, we're looking at state level opportunities. So like in Pennsylvania for the RISE PA funding, how can we help make them successful as they go and try to receive that funding? Now that's very hard. Companies aren't used to trying to go get grants or trying to work with policymakers. That's not what they're built to do. So how can, through the collaborative approach, can we help do that? Building in, right, the community benefits adder, the labor considerations, things that they're not used to doing. Finally, we do have also, just in the knowledge piece, a growing catalog of research, reports, guides, playbooks, tools, some of these case studies. So trying to bring all of that sort of learning together and really create a space for it, places to connect. We have monthly community calls, working groups, et cetera. We have our annual summit coming up in October. So that's Marty, I'd say, like, from our approach, it's kind of this broader set of networking, creating that community, bringing in the experts, bringing in the lessons from these more targeted experiences, channeling our members when they have a need to these other initiatives where things are moving forward in a more targeted way. And it really, what the peer-to-peer experience does, almost more than anything, is it gives companies the confidence to act, almost as a first step. So much of this is going to be done through, say, a buyer's alliance or with a consultant at hand, but it's really a lot of this learning from the experience of other companies, learning from the first movers, like are on the call today, that then they could see there's something that they can do, they can pursue, they can take it to that next level in the organization to at least say, can I get the okay to do the study? Can I actually start to go out to the facilities and see if I can do this in a couple of places? And so that's part of what we're trying to build through the RTC, and really build success that way.
All right, Kim, back to you for a minute here. Think about, you have a lot of oars in the water as GMA. Could you talk just a little bit about the tools that you're, like whether it's the offtake agreements or something else that you think are sort of highlights that people should be aware about that you're working on?
Yeah. Again, Ingrid did a really good job of explaining this up front. Across our programs, we aim to do as much of the work as possible for our member companies so that they don't have to do it themselves. So, we go out in the world, we find all of the available suppliers, we make sure that they're, bidding on our aggregate procurements. We are vetting all of the proposals on behalf of the members. We are making recommendations to the members, not just on which bid they should purchase from, but we're also, doing all of the pre-negotiation of the contract terms, doing our best to make sure that everybody is getting is educated on what the terms mean. We do a lot of specific briefings just for the lawyers at the companies, because a lot of times the lawyers can be the last hurdle we need to get over before we are able to sign on the dotted line for any particular contract. Also, we do a lot of one-on-one meetings. I've met with CFOs and CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world, trying to explain to them, what is it we're doing? Why are they investing in it? Why do they need to sign such a long offtake agreement in some cases, that kind of thing. So we're basically a full service shop to make sure that companies have as much support as they need to invest in decarbonizing heavy transport and industry.
Great. Thank you. Well, this takes us now over to our companies to talk a little bit from their side on the solution, looking at this through the lens of a solution set. What are the advantages for a company like IKEA for participating in these platforms and this types of collaboration? And why were you one of the first to sign up for Zemba?
Yeah. As we said, I said before, a collaboration is key. I mean, our starting point here has been, what can we do ourselves and within our sphere of influence, and then we work on that. And it could be efficiency measures, it could be switching to biofuels, etc. What do we need to do to work together with others, with our service providers? And we also know that all of these measures that we do here and now, and they are really giving results, they will not reach all the way to zero emissions goods flow. And here we cannot work. We need to do this together with others. And here is where this collaborative approach and working in the Zemba constellation becomes so important. And the more companies joining into this collaborative approach, the better. And the quicker this transformation will be, and the less costly it will be as well. So that is how we see it.
Eleanor, you're nodding. I'm coming to you. So you've been engaged in a lot of these various procurement efforts. Talk about what's in it for you guys and why why you've been so engaged.
So Amazon was part of SEBA, is still part of SEBA. So going back to those first efforts, and then we also helped launch as a first member the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance with GMA and EDF and RMI. And also now with GMA are involved in their electric trucking initiative and concrete and the AIM platform that Kim mentioned about making sure that the standards reflect these new approaches. And of course, members of Zemba as well, that was already mentioned. So that the value that we see is I think already been said, but to say it again, like we can map out as Amazon, what is the cost curve for these new technologies out to, past our goal of 2040. And we can have a pretty high confidence in that. But if we can add to that the current demand, aligned demand of all these other companies, then we see that cost curve coming down faster. So it's all about that at the end of the day, is getting there faster. And that's what Buyers Alliances allow us to do. They also just, help educate us on how to approach these challenges. So one thing that we've been involved with in GMA's concrete initiative is really mapping out the supply chain for concrete and getting all those layers of the supply chain engaged and involved. And so when I said initially that we ask our suppliers to join buyers alliances, that sounds a little funny, right? They're our suppliers, they're not our buyers, but they are. They usually buy something in order to supply it to us. And so it's really about knitting together those supply chains and galvanizing them towards the same goal.
This is great. Yes, one small point I'll make is that, this was always the motive behind companies reporting their Scope 3 emissions. This is part of the theory that if you were tracking your Scope 3 emissions, you would have an incentive and interest in working in that where you don't have direct control. And so this is the system operating as I think it was hoped to operate, but it's hard, right? Everybody's trying new things and doing it innovative. So, congratulations to all of you. Look, we're going to open up to our questions that we've been getting in the Q&A. And just as a heads up, we'll try to finish a few minutes early, and I'll come back to each of you with some closing. So you have a heads up, kind of come back to you with like your final thoughts or your thoughts for what you think those in the audience really should take away from today's conversation, and you'll get a quick chance to share that. But I want to start with one question, and this is mostly for Ingrid and Kim to talk, and I'll probably chime in here too, a little bit about their engagement with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and SBTI on book and claim or other indirect mitigation more broadly. Here's the question, is there an openness to strike a balance between credibility and flexibility that a framework like the one that AIM platform is creating? And if Elizabeth or Eleanor have input, their feedback would be interesting as well. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I can jump in there since it's referencing the AIM platform. I mean, the impetus for AIM was, coming out of conversations with GHGP and SBTI, frankly. So they're certainly very open to, I wouldn't say it's like flexible to the detriment of credibility. It's flexible and it's credible, the approach that the AIM platform is developing. The issue with where the standards were when AIM launched about 2 years ago was it was just a gap, right? It wasn't that SBTI or GHGP had said what you're doing shouldn't count or won't count. It was like that hadn't been conceived of, that companies would get together and buy sustainable aviation fuel certificates at $400 a ton in order to address their aviation emissions. Like that just wasn't a thing that people were really considering back in 2015, for example. So it was a new development that companies had taken on these incredibly ambitious SBTs, and were actually starting to act on them, and we're hitting roadblock after roadblock because they could not directly reduce their emissions with their suppliers, not in a sufficiently meaningful way. And they were looking for other options. And that's where book and claim systems in particular became much more, became an opportunity that they could pursue together as companies who were trying to decarbonize their supply chains. And so AIM came in and said, listen, GHGP, SBTI, we are fully supportive of your efforts, but we know your systems are slow, for lack of a better term. They're slow, they're heavy governance processes, they're going to take time to develop. And in the meantime, what we can be doing as a more kind of nimble, smaller initiative is to develop a lot of the content that you will need when you're finally getting to the point to be able to revise your standards. And that's what we've been doing for 2 years, and we found that it's worked. We still have GHGP and SBTI as observers at the AIM platform. We engage with them very regularly. And I'm personally on the Actions on Market Instruments group of the GHGP process for revising their standard. One of my staff members is on the SBTI process. Like, we are actively engaging and feeding the ideas that we've just had longer to develop than they've had in their processes, and which we've had the chance to pilot under the AIM platform as well. And actually, that's a good excuse for me to mention that we are launching a pilot process and a formal consultation process for the quality accounting and reporting standard that's been developed under the AIM platform this week, actually. So please look for that. If you go to aimplatform.org, you can see where that will be released shortly. And we're really, really looking for all of the feedback possible on that standard so that we can revise it and adopt a V1 at the end of this year or early next year. And in the meantime, we're still going to be engaging with GHGP and SBTI on all of the learnings that we're having through that process. So a very long answer, a long way to say yes, they're very open to flexible and credible approaches like what's being developed under AIM.
Well, given time, maybe Elizabeth or Eleanor, any thoughts you want to add on this one, since this affects you guys so much in terms of the ability to do these things?
I can jump in. I
Yeah, go ahead.
agree with exactly with what Kim said. There's definitely that openness. If you take a look at SBTI's draft corporate standard, you'll see that they use a little bit different language than we're using here, but insets and book and claim are part of that, and how companies can meet their interim targets and longer term targets. So I think that, contributing, like Kim said, to development of these credible and high integrity systems by joining these initiatives here that are setting a really high bar that we're talking about here today, as well as these pilot opportunities through AIM. There's also an SBTI pilot that's coming up. That's going to give those standard setters the practical information from companies about how to strike the right balance and really recognize all the positive change that's happened in the last decade in this space.
Yeah, and I just echo that, what Eleanor is saying, yeah.
And so what that tees up is going to be important for all the companies who are here to be providing input to those processes, both in terms of comments, whether it's through you individually or part of coalitions, the piloting that Eleanor was just talking about, to get the real practical experience that'll be hopefully built into these things. WWF is actually a very strong supporter of these sort of mechanisms as well. The value chain component that Kim and AIM have been working on is critically important. We need to drive more investment as quickly as possible. And these places where whether it's IKEA or Amazon or any number of other companies have a strong interest, we really need to open the door to how those companies can invest and take credit for those kinds of investments, which is what all of, I think, we've just been talking about. I've got a couple of other questions here. One is a specific one. This is on Maritime. What in the very beginning, Ingrid, you mentioned the long-term agreements. Someone asked, what's the time frame for those longer-term agreements for the maritime carriers? How long is long-term, and how far out are those solutions going to be readily available?
Yeah, great. Good question. So in terms of solutions that aren't readily available, so part of the challenge here when we look at something like e-fuels, we have a lot of fuel producers who have been pretty close to ready to go. And what we've seen is a lack of market demand and a bit of a shortage or a delay in sort of the policy landscape really driving demand in a way that policy can. And so it's not that we are able to make advanced market commitments for things that are 10 years out. We are able to make advanced market commitments to things that are 2 or 3 years out. And the key ingredient for those solutions that is missing is the demand. So I think we do have to be careful about, sort of how speculative do we go? I mean, we are asking companies to sign offtake commitments. We're asking them to eventually pay an invoice for something that we as an initiative need to ensure that the parties that we're recommending that they enter into contract with are, stable businesses that can really do the job. And we have a lot of confidence in their ability to really deliver. And so it's not that these are so far out solutions. There are some really interesting solutions that could be ready in a decade or two. But we can't commit to those yet. It's simply, we're just not there yet technologically. So these are things that are ready to go that could be long-term solutions and that really are hungry for that demand in order to get to FID, in order to ramp up production, et cetera. In terms of the time frame, when we started this process, we were hearing from fuel producers, we need 10 to 15 years of offtake from carriers. And they can't give us that because their customers are only buying 1 year at a time. Well, it's hard for us to ask an Amazon or an IKEA to enter into a 15-year offtake agreement when they don't know what their situation is going to be, right? They just don't plan necessarily that far out for something like shipping. Now, y'all may plan farther out in other arenas, but for, shipping services, that's too long. But what we can commit to is about 3 to 5 years. So our current procurement that we're just wrapping up now, we're going to look for deployment of e-fuel in 2027. We are at the end of that procurement cycle. We're about to decide on winners and sort of secure those final commitments from our members. And have the deployment start in 27 and go, for many of our companies, that'll go through 31. So they'll be able to already now have confidence in the emissions reductions that they'll be able to claim in an important year like 2030. And so it's longer term, but it's not infinitely long term. And it's interesting because when you talk to different investors, some of them don't even want a 10 to 15-year commitment in the fuel project that they're investing in. They actually want 3 to 5 so that they can exit. So there are interesting dynamics there on how long is long enough, and you hear different things from different audiences. But 3 to 5 years to us, at least at this point in human history, is about as long of a commitment as I think we can ask, public-facing companies to make to something like decarbonized shipping. That may differ in some other sectors where those kind of commitments do need to be longer term just because we're talking about big infrastructure or whatever.
They have been in different lengths in the electricity space, right? There was some 10, 15, but they never really went out past that. That's a lot for a lot of companies. So it does depend on the commodity. We're almost out of time here. I'm just going to pick off one quick question here. There's a question about why does the greenhouse gas protocol have to control mitigation? Can they continue to manage carbon inventories without involvement in the solution side? And the short answer there is that's actually an open question, right? That they've been asking about how to limit what they're doing just to the accounting and leaving the credit and claims and leadership criteria to other organizations. We can't get into that here today, but I think that's an on the table question at the moment. As we're coming toward the end of our hour, I do want to turn back to all of you and maybe this time start with Eleanor and Elizabeth about your take. what's the most important lesson you'd like folks to take away from our conversation today? And what's one thing they could do to be more engaged? I don't know. Eleanor, we'll start with you since you were,
Sounds
we'll go in
great.
reverse order.
I think, take a look into the organizations that Amazon and IKEA are members of that are represented here today and the ones that were mentioned, and see if they can be a fit for you. If it's, and how you can get started in tackling your scope 3 is the recommendation I would make. And then as the other thing that I just wanted to mention is it's really important to have that understanding with your corporate leadership of where these costs are headed. They are high right now. But that's looking at human history, that's always the case. And then there's a steep curve coming down. So being able to understand that for these sources of emissions, the trajectory that we're on is really important for companies to be able to convey, to have consistent support from their leadership to continue to make these investments.
And I would then also really emphasize the importance and the power of the learning journey of coming together. If we look back, what we have learned together during this journey, and I think it is about really taking the first step, and then you're in another position and you look around and you see things. And this about constant being in motion towards this common target. There's something so powerful in this, and we really need that.
Thank you for that inspiration, Elizabeth. Very important message. Ingrid, we'll go to Kim and then to Dan.
I think I would just leave us with the image of humanity sort of stumbling over the 1.5 threshold as we speak. And when is the time to act? And, some observers may be asking themselves, well, but can't I be a second mover, right? Let's let Eleanor and Elizabeth pay for these first of a kind projects. And then once we see that cost come down, then we'll jump in. And that's a fair point of view. But if everybody does that, we're never going to get there, right? And I think this is one of those moments where it really, and I don't want to get too corny about why we need to do this and why we need to do it quickly, but we really urgently do. And I think our collaborators here on the line are working incredibly hard. We all have very talented staff with a lot of expertise, just ready to help. And so take advantage of that opportunity. This is an incredible moment. A lot of philanthropy is, helping to defray the costs for companies to be able to participate in these kind of initiatives. There often is some cost to you, but it is so worth it. It is such a good deal to get this kind of hand-on assistance to do something that as a company you simply cannot do alone. And so I would just encourage everyone to seize the moment. Let's get it done. You've got ways to do it. We're here to help.
Kim?
Yeah, maybe building on that, I'll give a bit of an example for like the just dip your toe in kind of advice. Because a lot of companies, I'll give a very specific example. For one company that was trying to join the Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance, I was talking to her, the sustainability manager for this company, for over a year. And I was talking to her boss and her boss's boss and all of her colleagues and getting everybody on board. And even then she was like, this is just a learning experience for us. We're not going to be able to buy this year. And we said, as we do with everybody, that's fine. If you just jump in, learn, buy when you can, get involved in contracting when you can. And at the end of that year, after telling me there was no way she was going to be able to buy, she called and said, we just found $30 million and I've been given it to spend on SAF. Can you help us buy $30 million worth of SAF certificate? I was like, yes. And that's why you just dipped your toe in a year ago, was because somebody was accidentally going to find you $30 million to spend on SAF this year. So if you don't start the journey, you'll never get to that, decision to start spending money. So just start it on any of these sectors, whatever's the most important to you.
All right, Dan, that's important. Dan, wrap us up here and we're going to close out.
Yeah, just reiterate, I think the main message from your peers, from the leaders, Amazon and IKEA, and from all of us on the other side is if you've got a target and it's rapidly approaching, and you're not sure what to do, you're not alone. And that's why we're here. That's our mission. And so If you're not sure what to do, call any one of us up, figure out how to get involved, figure out, who to talk to. And if it's not one of us, we can direct you. There's a lot of resources there. And really the whole idea, and just to reiterate, of the peer-to-peer learning is to not go it alone. It's so that you can, when you talk to your internal, when you talk to your companies, when you speak that language within your own organization, is that you can have that credibility of someone else has done it, someone else is doing it, and that's what we're here to help you with. So give us a call.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Good way to end. Thank you to all of the speakers here for this great panel, great discussion. Really appreciated all of the input. Thanks for the audience for being here. America's All In is grateful to have been able to organize this webinar. And so everyone have a great day, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you,
everybody.
Marty.